Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining me for the Return to NICU Parent Network's Friday feature. These are our member highlights. So, the first Friday of the month is when I sit down with our board president, Gigi Kanyangwa Fernandez, to do our Let's Talk About Race series. And every other Friday, we get to have a chat with one of our incredible members. And I am super excited that we have Beth Simonton today, who is down in South Florida with ICU Baby. Beth, thank you so much for being here.
Kara, thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to talk to you and
Oh,
also just to share this story of ICU Baby. I'm honored to be here. Thanks so much.
well, yeah, and that's the thing is, that's the whole reason we started this was because we definitely have a member directory on our website, and we've got, over 40 incredible members spread all over the country. But there is something really special about hearing directly from the person who founded or co-founded, had that spark of an idea. Or as our keynote speaker at NPN Live said, that whisper that activated you. So I'm really excited to hear about your spark or your whisper. So let's start off real quick because for those who don't know, NICU Parent Network is a professional organization made up of NICU parent leaders who collectively support the needs and best interests of NICU families and bereaved families. And 99% of our leaders had that personal experience as well. And it doesn't matter if that experience was an early pregnancy loss, if it was a 1 year NICU stay or a 2 hour NICU stay, because the experience is traumatic. So, Beth, let's start right there and tell us about your experience.
Thanks. And I love that you use that term whisper. I've been thinking about that ever since the conference. My NICU experience was with my third child, and my first two children were born full term. I had the experience of taking home these babies in the quote unquote natural course, as I always say, with the balloons and the flowers. And when I became pregnant with Benedict, I had two little ones at home. So one was 3 and one was 2. And the doctors told me I was high risk, not because of my age, but because I had polyhydramnios, which, with all the friends having babies at the time, everyone was like, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
It's super simple when it comes down to it. We hear a lot about moms having too little amniotic fluid, and I had too much. So,
Oh,
as my gynecologist very politely said, you look like you're having triplets. And it was in such good spirit that she said that, but it was true. I had too much fluid, and so it did look like I had extra babies. And there's a lot of reasons that could happen. And 50% of the time it's benign. There's nothing. They don't know what causes it, and the baby's born healthy. And then the other 50% of the time there is something seriously wrong. And in my case, they couldn't pick that up on any of the scans. So they just week after week, I think it was twice a week I was going in, we're monitoring it. And Benedict, I prayed for a healthy baby, just like we all do. And Benedict was born, and he did not go to the NICU. And I was shocked because I was convinced that I was mentally ready to have
right,
a problem, so to speak.
right.
Are you ready for this? He was born 38 weeks, this little 9.5 pound baby, not so little,
Yeah.
came to me with these big eyes, blonde hair, and then he asphyxiated 24 hours later and was literally whisked away into the NICU. And I think the reason that this is a significant part to my story is because Ben only stayed in the NICU for 6 days. I'm one of the short-term stays, as we say, but I think he's critical to my story because the fear that I had for those months that I was high risk was real. And then having him come to me and not go to the NICU, I thanked God. And then having that right turn where he was whisked away to the NICU, it was just like that in that the variable emotions that we all have as parents, but
Yeah.
magnified because of everything that was going on.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
and I think, that's one thing that we also, really try to say over and over is that it really doesn't matter if it was 1 hour, 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, that any NICU experience, any loss experience, any, high risk experience where you are, in fear for the life of yourself, of your child. I mean, there's no reason or purpose in making any kind of comparisons or saying, well, this is worse than that, because it's all so personal. And that's what connects us all is, we all come to this work because of a very personal, very intense, and often traumatic experience with the lives of our children. And what always inspires me and keeps me going is being able to, have these conversations with each of our members and to hear these stories and to learn, where you really do see all of those common threads of how these experiences touch us. And I can only imagine and that having this fear of not knowing what was going to happen, having him placed in your arms, seemingly healthy, you probably thought, oh, thank goodness, the worst is behind us. And then a few hours later, he's whisked away. I mean, that must have been really terrifying.
It just plays, it's such a pull on your emotions, and you have your hormones are everywhere. I had the two little girls at home. It was just a
Right.
lot. And,
Yeah.
then we circle and what was my whisper? Was that my whisper? What was my whisper? And I think
Mhm.
it was 6 days in the NICU. Can you imagine? And where I was here in South Florida was in a unit that does have private rooms, but I actually was in the ward style unit, which is where the beds are right next to each other. And so my whisper came in sitting there day after day for 6 days and seeing that many babies didn't have a parent by their side,
Mm.
that many parents weren't able to come because of the length of this day or because of their commitments at home, or they didn't have a babysitter for their kids, or they didn't have transportation. So my whisper was really on being in there for a moment to see what other families go through.
Mm.
And that's why I really believe that's why Ben ended up in the NICU, just to show me that part of the world that I didn't know and to
Mm.
appreciate the children I had, and then to do something to help families that had a more difficult course.
Right. So did that kind of realization hit you in that moment, in those 6 days, or was it after you came home and were reflecting, where you kinda said, "Okay, something needs to happen here. Something needs to be done for these families."
It's a great question, and I've never thought of it, but it was in that moment. It
Mm,
was the first day.
interesting.
It
Yeah.
was the I remember there was a woman, down, and I remember it so clearly, down the row from me, whose son failed the car seat test for the second time.
Oh,
Here in Florida, they have to be in a car seat and stable to go home. I don't know if that's a national standard, but,
yeah.
and I remember the cry she let out was a primitive
Mm,
cry. It was from her inner soul that this little guy had failed again. And I remember looking around like, well, who's here to help her?
right.
Who's holding her hands? And the physicians and the nurses do the best job. And in the hospital I was at, they are, some of the best in the country.
Yeah.
But I felt like we need someone to hug her. When I wanted to go hug her. um,
Right.
and that's when I asked, who's helping her? And then the mom across from me would come every night at 9 o'clock. And I said, why are you coming so late? Well, I have to work during the day. And then my other, well, who's helping her? And
Right.
so the exposure to all these other families.
Right.
And then at day 6, me being able to take home this beautiful, healthy baby boy. And for me to kind of have that, it's definitely not survivor's guilt, but something like that. Like, well, why me? I could have handled a sicker baby. I don't
Mhm.
have the hurdles that these families have.
Right.
Why did God select me to take home this baby who's going to be fine? Why wasn't I dealt this card? And I think that that's something I thought of when I did leave, is like,
Yeah.
how do some people get lucky so much and others have such hardships? And I think that was kind of the catalyst to get us going. But those barriers for other families were visible immediately.
And you have a co-founder for ICU Baby, Nicole. Can you tell us a little bit about her and a little bit about her story?
So Nicole is incredibly special for so many reasons. She started out as my friend, and we've developed this organization with wonderful women, Leah, Annie, and some of the other great people behind ICU Baby. And so Nicole's what I call the bookend of my experience. And Nicole has a daughter, an older daughter, and became pregnant with her son, Matthew. And Matthew was born here in Miami while they were vacationing.
Mm.
was rushed to a hospital nearby and unfortunately didn't make it. And it's not something she talks about regularly, so I'm a little reluctant to talk about it myself. But what I can say is that in such hardship that I can't imagine, she's a woman who has stepped up to face probably the hardest time of her life to give back. And I couldn't find a better co-founder, to be honest, because of her just altruistic, giving, compassionate ways, despite she probably never wants to think about it again, but she's reminded every time she goes back to the same unit to help those families. It's just, she's an inspiration to all of us, really.
So how did you guys come together for, as friends, and then let's start ICU Baby?
So, everything happens in preschool. So where I met all my friends. So we have two little girls. Let me share by saying she lost Matthew, and then she had twins after. So her rainbow baby, so to speak. So I want to make sure I end on the note to include she has an older daughter and the twins. Well, her twins, one is a little girl, and she quickly became friends with my daughter. And so we became fast friends. And I was pregnant with Benedict during this time. So she was my friend while I was pregnant, and she kind of, stood by my side during this complicated pregnancy and Ben being in the NICU. Yeah. And then when I said to her, hey, we really need to do something for the families, that took a while to get that off the ground with hospitals. But then when I realized, gosh, this is going to be a lot of work, I invited her to join me as a co-founder. And she, this is about 1 year after we had Ben, she really rose to the occasion and stepped into all the work that's involved in getting something like this off the ground. And like I said, we had other wonderful women join us who are still with us now. And it was that a lot of meetings and coffee, how are we going to do this? Right. And at the time I didn't know of NPN. So a lot of this, unfortunately, we reinvented the wheel of what a lot of the NPN members are doing so well.
Yeah. So I just want to point out a comment that we've got from Amanda Tellman. Hi, Amanda. Amanda has joined us as an audience in the audience a few times. And she says, it's so interesting that everyone's whisper comes at such different moments in our journeys. It's a moment that we will never forget, but we remember every detail of the moment. And I think that is so true. And it's so nice to hear your moment and then what grew out of that moment in this friendship that you already had with Nicole. And so let's get into the nitty gritty about ICU Baby. So you started how long ago?
So my son is 8. So we were founded about 6 months later. So we're about 7.5 this December.
Okay. And tell us all about your organization. How do you make an impact for those families that you saw in the NICU across the way from you that needed someone to hold their hand, give them a hug, whatever it was that they needed? Tell us about what you do.
So it's that's how it started. I mean, that it really was about, first of all, working with the hospital to figure out what was right for that particular hospital, which was so grateful for their partnership. And then it was about it was really a couple of us going into the hospital as former NICU parents and going bedside to bedside, talking to these families. And that's how we weren't really supposed to become a big organization. We were just supposed to be living in service, right? And so it was the bedside to bedside support. And then we developed a NICU pack, which is a big tote bag. And we were giving these to the families with different tools to help them care for their baby in the NICU. Breast milk coolers at the time were taken away in the hospital for various reasons. So we provided big breast milk coolers and swaddle blankets and journals. And, we wanted to give them a gift. And then it kind of evolved from that hand-holding and conversation, which is so important, that connectivity, to becoming something more, which then became meals. Let's have meals for the families, and let's have different arts and crafts programs for the families. And so that was really the crux of what was our emotional support, which is what we really say is the spine of ICU Baby. The emotional support is so critical to NICU families. And we were at 2 hospitals doing that. And then we realized, well, wait a second, the families that we're supporting here in the hospital are only the families that can get here. We realized, like, all the families that aren't able to get to the hospital, particularly here in Miami, where there's such discrepancy in wealth, and our transportation system as a city is not as strong as other cities. So we thought, okay, well, we need to get the families here. Can't support them if they're not here. And at the time, there was no telesupport, right? So now telesupport solves that problem in a lot of ways, but we also want the families there so they can help care for their babies. So
Yes,
this is
absolutely.
where we developed the transportation program. And this is where we talk about emotional support. This is really the financial component of our programming. And so we're identifying families in collaboration with the hospitals that can't afford the cost of going back and forth from home to hospital.
Right.
And this is such an easy intervention. I mean, it really is providing $40 a week or a little more if they live further away in gas money, especially now, allows families to not worry about, can I afford to go today, or to reallocate those expenses to maybe groceries or childcare so they're able to be there. And so that was our transportation program. And now we're finally also with the pandemic, we realized, gosh, we need to provide NICU health literacy. A lot of these families are getting there, but they don't know what the NICU is. And that is very prevalent with the social determinants of health here in Miami-Dade County. And so this was our answer to what we can do in light of everything that's come out in the last 2 years is let's give them some NICU health literacy, and that's our informational programming. So that's our comprehensive scheme.
Love it. I love it. And you actually do a lot of work as well with the Florida Perinatal Quality Collaborative. Would you mind talking a little bit about that? Because I think that's one thing that I didn't know early on was even an option or existed, was all this work that goes on at the state level with providers and how important it is to have that voice of the family represented. I know that was not on your list of questions that I gave you ahead of time, but I hope you don't mind just sharing a little bit about what that Florida Perinatal Quality Collaborative is all about, what your role is.
So I'm so happy to talk about this because I'm so proud of our state for having this. And I'm even more really honored and proud that they are taking the voice of the parents so seriously. It's something I take very seriously because it's hard to be the mouthpiece for everyone, right? But I feel I always have my notes. So what it is here in Florida, there are a group of doctors and nurses and healthcare teams from the NICU that get together in cycles. I believe this is a 2-year cycle, 2 or 3 year cycle, and they identify things that can be made better for our families. And sometimes it could be somewhat more medical, like decreasing C-sections, the timing of C-sections. In this case, we're being led by Dr. Mark Hudak, who is just an incredible human and physician. And he recognizes the importance of parents being involved in their baby's care and the impact that has on outcomes for babies. And so when the collaborative came together with some incredible physicians here in Florida, they decided, how are we going to make the experience better for families in the NICU here in Florida? And so the reason why I was invited was because, not because necessarily of my personal experience, but more because I have contact with so many mentors who speak with families, and I have contact with families myself who share so I'm kind of the collective voice, I guess, of some of the concerns of the families. And so we had focus groups with families asking what could be done better. We've had meetings consistently. We have a conference where they've invited me to speak for an hour about the needs of parents. And for me, it's humbling because we know doctors and nurses should care about parents, but the fact that they've given us a spotlight, not just a nod, they've given us a spotlight here in Florida to share about the needs of parents. It's incredible. And I'm just so glad to be offered to help.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad because, it is important that when, it's like that age old saying, nothing about us without us, or nothing for us without us.
That's
And
right.
so you've got to have the families included. So let's talk about all the different ways that families can find ICU Baby. So website, social media, if someone knows someone that's in the area that needs you. Now, I imagine you said you're in 2 hospitals, is that right?
We are.
That's not just those aren't the only hospitals in Miami that have NICUs. So I imagine there are other families in the area that may not have support
Right.
resources at their hospital. Do you still offer support to families, even if they're not in one of your contracted hospitals?
So it's so interesting, Kara. Yes, there are tons of NICUs down here in South Florida, and we're so lucky for that. We support almost 200 beds in the 2 NICUs that we're at. So we really are operating at capacity.
Mm,
That being said, we never like to turn away a family that calls us in need. And
right.
while some of our programs do have parameters where, for various reasons, if we can not support someone, we have a bevy of community resources where we are happy to, not just can, but are happy to connect folks in a way. We want to be a resource for all the NICU families in South Florida.
Yeah. And so ICUBaby.org is the
Yes.
website, right?
I'm not good at giving plugs.
Yes.
It's not my strength. So icbaby.org is our website. You can also follow us on Instagram, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. We kind of do a good job with Twitter. Twitter's harder for us, but
Yeah.
do follow us. We love to feature our work, but we also love to feature the stories of our family. And no matter where you are around the world, really watching, an experience of a family inspires so much hope. So that's really what our social media is primarily for.
Yeah. And what about volunteers? How can people volunteer or help ICU Baby? What are those different opportunities?
So right now we are looking for parent mentors. So these are anyone, fathers, even grandmothers, mothers, that have had a NICU experience that would be willing to serve on our telesupport team. There is extensive training with that, of course. We're also looking for bedside supporters if you're local to the area where you've had that NICU experience and can go through the hospital to help us volunteer in the NICU we're in there each week, 2 days. And then volunteering as a corporation or company or a church or temple to help us pack our bags, to make, gifts for the families, for the siblings. We need volunteers all the time. We never turn away a volunteer. I can always find something helpful for the families. And the way to reach out to us about volunteering is to either look on our website or email volunteer@icubaby.org. We'd love to have you.
Great. Yeah, I know. I've seen some organizations where, someone's Girl Scout troop came and helped pack bags one time, or, just different groups, or a church youth group, or, something like that. It's nice when you can have just involve the community in an even bigger way.
It's so meaningful. I mean, the Girl Scouts are next level, really. They're amazing. But, I think what is meaningful to families in the NICU, what we've seen is, as many amazing things as we give them, it's when we give them the card from whoever packed that bag that says, I'm thinking of you, that makes them really tear up because they know they're not alone. And that's so important in a NICU journey.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank now as we close. We've got our last couple of questions.
Please.
Fill in the blank. NICU and bereaved families are
Brave.
Mhm.
Brave.
Yeah.
Bravest people I know.
Oh, for sure. Without a doubt.
They inspire me.
And what is one thing that you wish every NICU and bereaved family knew?
I wish they know how important hope is. Hope.
Mm.
It's a word we use a lot in ICU Baby. We call a lot of things hope. And I think that even in the most devastating situation, a bereaved family, what I've seen in Nicole and what I learned from Nicole is during her darkest hours, she never really lost hope that there would be a brighter tomorrow.
Mm.
So even in those cases, which are, so difficult, as personally to think about,
Yeah.
her maintenance of hope was important. And I see that in all the families that we're privileged to support. The ones that have hope and keep that hope strong, they tend to do better emotionally.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And I couldn't agree more. So, well, as we close, is there anything else you want to share? Any events you have coming up towards the end of the year, or any last comments, anything that you forgot to mention about ICU Baby or the services that you provide? Just open up to anything.
Well, I guess 2 things. The first one is, yes, we do have a community walk here in Miami.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about that. November 6th. It's at Zoo Miami.
Oh,
And we're going to be walking through the zoo. How amazing with the babies.
I love that.
So we're going to be walking through the zoo, and it helps us. We make a big deal of World Prematurity Month. And that is the first weekend of World Prematurity Month. So we invite anyone that's been touched by the NICU or anyone that hasn't and just wants to help families to join us. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, Kira, is directed to you. I mean, I think it's been such an honor to be part of NPN. And I'm so inspired by the members. My gosh, they teach me so much, and they've been incredible mentors, including yourself. So thanks for having me today, but thanks for all that you do to elevate ICU Baby in so many ways.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And I love that there's this return to events that we're seeing. And I wish I lived closer. I would love to come walk through the zoo, and Mia would love that too.
I tried one last weekend, and the monkeys were everywhere, and it was just amazing. I mean, I loved it. So hopefully it'll be fun for our families. And here in Miami in November is a little cooler. So it'll be nice.
And we've got, I'm assuming it must be Drea or whoever is running the NICU alumni Facebook right now. They've commented with the ICUBaby.org Hope Parade link and a smiley emoji with hearts, because I know you're well acquainted with Drea and the work that she's getting off the ground down also in your neck of the woods. So that's
She's
great.
Amazing. Thanks so much for doing that. I appreciate it.
And she says, yep, it's me, Drea. Thank you, Drea. All right. Well, that is all we have for today. Thank you so much, Beth, for sharing a little bit about your story, for sharing about your whisper and ICU Baby and all the amazing work you do, not just for the families in your hospitals, but for families everywhere. So we are very fortunate to have you as a member of this community. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And we will see you next Friday with Me Too Books.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great weekend.